Housing Corporation Finance Committee meeting. Hope you're having a great day. I know I am. We have a quorum, I believe.
Yes, sir. There is a quorum and the press has been notified.
Yes, notified. Thank you very much. Okay. First on the agenda is consideration and approval of the minutes from the meeting held on February 18th. If I could get a motion, get that on the table, please.
Here briefly, and now you want to.
Someone make the motion? I didn't hear anything. Oh, Holly's got her hand up. Holly, I think you're muted. Okay. Any discussion, any changes, anything that needs to be brought up? Okay. I have a second.
I'll second Isaac.
Thank you, Isaac. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, fantastic. Now, where'd my agenda go? I lost my agenda, so I don't know what's next. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay, Kevin's up. Kevin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item number 3 concerns the recommendation for the approval of the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2022. So auditing standards require that a risk-based audit plan be developed annually to determine the priorities of the internal audit department in a manner that's consistent with corporate and organizational goals and objectives. So the plan's designed to provide the board with a summary regarding the internal audit services that are to be performed during the upcoming fiscal year. And it includes a mix of operational, programmatic reviews, as well as external audit report, support and advisory services. So a summary of the planned activities is outlined on pages 5 and 7, or pages 5 through 7 of the audit plan. And a summary of the completed audit projects for this current fiscal year, 2021, is also outlined on pages 9 and 10. So as you know, most of the work that is performed by internal audit is regulatory in nature, and it's performed based upon the requirements. The annual audit plan remains a flexible document and is intended to optimize our audit coverage to the best extent possible. But with that in mind, the plan is flexible, and the internal audit department is always available to address any concerns of the board or senior management. So I would be happy to answer any questions about the plan, or otherwise, for your consideration, the audit plan for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you, Kevin. Does anyone have any questions for Kevin? Okay. I'm going to have to get my own agenda back up on the screen because I can't remember where we are here.
We need a motion here, Chairman Brunson.
This is George. I'll move that we accept the plan as proposed.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have a second?
This is Gail, and I'll second it.
Thank you, Gail. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you. Moving on to item number 4, presentation from Jim. Jim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Excuse me, I lost my voice yesterday, so I'll try to keep my comments to a minimum, and maybe I can keep my voice going here. This agenda item is a presentation of the third quarter financial statements. A briefer presentation will be presented to the full board next Thursday, but we're going to go through with this committee and point out a couple of highlights. So if we go to the pro forma statement of net position. Okay, this is, I don't have my navigation on here. Okay, I'll point you to where we need to be on total assets. You can see have dropped from 854 million to 843 million. a small drop. There you go. Thank you, Jeremy. And then if you look at total liabilities, you see a much more substantial drop from 490 million to 439 million. And when assets drop a little bit and liabilities drop a lot, then net equity goes up quite a bit. And you can see that on the third from the bottom line, an increase from $365 million to $403 million. This is all as anticipated. The one anomaly on this liabilities line, which increased from 106 to 112, we would have expected a decrease primarily because our escrow accounts are rebuilding from having paid all the property taxes in the fourth calendar quarter of 2020, and that they'd be rebuilding. The reason, and we dug into this, why is this higher at the end of March versus the end of June last year? We have been suffering, if you want to use the word suffering, tremendous amount of payoffs of our servicing portfolio, and the payoff monies temporarily sit in a liability account until they're remitted to the investor. And so even though the escrow accounts are a little bit smaller, the principal accounts, the P&I accounts, are much, much larger than they were at the end of June. And so that anomaly is explained. If you go down to the bottom, the two bottom lines, these are big income generators of the corporation that are not on the balance sheet, so they're not listed above. We have a servicing portfolio of $2.4 billion. There's been a small decrease from June to March. As I said before, we've had tremendous amounts of payoffs. Our production is good. It's just that the payoffs are running faster than the production. But if you look at the bottom line of this, the servicing that is paying off is lower yielding servicing than the servicing we're putting on. And so our average service fee rate has increased from 32.7 bips to 33.4 basis points, or an increase of 0.7 basis points. So even though our portfolio is smaller, our gross revenue coming from the portfolio is larger. And so we don't like to see the portfolio shrink, but if we're going to have some shrinkage, we'd like to replace it with higher servicing portfolio, and that's exactly what's happening. As a little bit of an illustration of where the portfolio is and relative to the balance sheet. Oh, I don't have the chart in, Jeremy, we don't have the chart on that, do we? Okay, apologies. I don't have a picture, sorry. If you go to this schedule here.
Jen, would you like me to pull up the one that you did yesterday? This is the one that was sent at the end of the day yesterday.
If you could do it quickly, yeah, that would be better.
If everyone bear with me just a moment.
Because that has the navigation on it. It's a little bit easier for everybody to follow. I apologize to the committee for, we only have about 20 versions of this. We got the wrong one queued up for this. Just a second. These good news reports, I like to have all my charts. Anyway, the chart that Jeremy's going to put up here, and I'll explain it a little bit so that when it does pop up, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a chart that most of the board is familiar with. It's what I call the red and black chart, but it graphically depicts the size of our servicing portfolio for pretty much maybe 12 or 13 years. And you know, the concept of when we sell loans to the secondary market, that servicing that is created, it creates an annuity stream for the corporation. So we get the benefit of having that portfolio being serviced in the form of servicing fees, but we don't actually have that portfolio on the balance sheet. So it doesn't look like we have very many assets to generate future income, but in fact, this off-balance sheet asset totaling just short of $3 billion is out there that generates the income. And then the black line on this, when it does pop up, is evidence that the on-balance sheet piece, which is our outstanding bond portfolio, which is the benchmark of what would be on the books if we weren't in the secondary market, is continuing to shrink. And all of this is by plan. We have had a conscious effort to deliver our loans. It's a more economic delivery to go into the secondary market and create servicing off balance sheet rather than finance it with bonds on balance sheet. It's generating significantly more net income for the corporation. Doing that, it just doesn't look like we have the assets going forward to generate future income when in fact we do. And another pregnant pause.
Jeremy, I emailed you the
Do you have
the right packet.
Here we go. Ah, there it is. Okay, and I'm not going to repeat what I just said about this, but you can see how the red line does generate, is the off-balance sheet portfolio that is generating income. And as I told the board maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that the bigger we get, the harder it is to continue to grow, and that the curve was going to start convex, and that's exactly what has happened over the last couple of years. It's not an emergency. The average servicing fee that we're yielding is higher than it was. But it does illustrate that, which is very typical in a mortgage servicer. The bigger you get, the harder it is to keep the growth going. And so I think this is a good representative, a visual representative of that dynamic. Okay, if we can go to the next schedule then, Jeremy, thank you very much. Okay, this is the income statement of the corporation for the 9 months ended March 31 of 2021. If we go down to the letter A, which is the net income that we as management are responsible for. And what we do is we carve out of the actual recorded net income any movement in the income or expense attributable to interest rate movements and the impact on the value of our securities. We have to market all of our securities, and so our income statement is subject to the increases and decreases from that. But when you carve that out, then you can see, how the corporation is performing based on decisions that are being made by the management group. And line A shows that for the first 9 months of last year, we had made $27.8 million, and that this year had been $40.5 million, or an increase over last year of 12.7. Now, where did that come from? Clearly, line D, gains on sale of loans, and we've brought this information to the board over the last 8 or 9 months. The price that we're getting for our loans is I don't understand why it's as high as it is, but I'll take it. And we've been able to execute very, very profitably in the secondary market and sell our loans to the tune of $11 million more profit this year than last on about the same volume. Other items of note on the income statement here is line B. You can see that the net interest income coming off primarily the HRB is down. That is also by design. Because we're issuing all of our loans or financing our loans in the secondary market, we're not issuing bonds and arbitraging them on the books in the form of interest income. And so that is going down as we continue to earn servicing fees and also gains on sale of the loans into the secondary market. Ahead in the United States, we conservatively increased our loan loss reserve by $1 million. We did that at March 31, and we did another $1 million at the end of the fiscal year in June 30th. These are just cautionary. It was a cautionary move. We have not experienced any huge increases in losses, but we also have many of our loans in forbearance, and so there still may be some embedded losses in there. So it was a prudent thing to do, prudent thing to keep on the books and not reverse off, but no need for in fiscal 21 to continue to provide extra losses or allowance for losses due to COVID on the financial statements. That's about it on this schedule. Thank you, Jeremy. No navigation aids on this. I draw your attention to the second to last line, proceeds from issuance of debt, draws on lines of credit. We are producing about the same amount of loans this year as we did last year, but we don't need our lines of credit to finance them as much. And that's because of the amount of cash and reserves we've been able to stockpile, primarily from the cumulative gains on sale of loans over the last several years. So we're able to finance temporarily finance our production pending sale to the secondary using internal cash flows. Now, once the bill comes due and we pay it for the cessation from the pension plan, we'll be utilizing our lines of credit much more and you'll see that number go up relative to the amount of loans that we're producing also. If we go 2 lines above that, thank you, Jeremy, to repayments on housing mortgage loans, I explained that our liability accounts increased because we had a lot of principal repayments on our loans that are sitting in an escrow account, if you will, pending payment to our investors. Here's an example of the fact that our prepayments are almost 50% higher this year than they were last year, moving from $67 million to 96. That puts downward pressure on the size of the portfolio. We're not replacing it as fast as it's running off, but we are replacing it with higher yielding service fees. So not a bad thing, just one that we're watching. This schedule is the budget versus actual analysis. A number of things going on here. If you look at letter A, it says that we have a surplus year to date of $5.6 million versus an estimated surplus of $372,000. And you say, wow, $5.25 million surplus to budget. Either we're bad budgeters or we're having a knockout year. It's mostly we're having a knockout year, and there's a lot of timing differences at play here. If you look at line C, total operating expenses, we're $500,000 positive to budget on that line. That number will revert back to even to budget or possibly a little bit unfavorable to budget here in the fourth quarter. And we'll discuss that on the next chart. If you go to line D, Department of HUD and Urban Development homeless, that increase and significant budget, extra budget is primarily due to COVID initiatives and COVID dollars coming out of Washington and showing up as admin fees that were not in the budget, didn't know to put them in the budget last year, and that we're enjoying some of that income there. When the operating expenses revert back to even or unfavorable to variance on line C in the fourth quarter, we will see that the costs incurred to get that surplus up top will be borne in the operating expenses of the corporation. And so again, the story makes sense. We're going to have extra expenses showing up in the fourth quarter, and to where that variance on the bottom will actually turn negative, and that should start matching the extra up top. If you go to line E, rental production, the third quarter is by far the richest quarter in this line based on the timing of certain billings that go out and the timings of certain decisions that are made on funds availability and tax credit issuances. That number will significantly decrease. The surplus will decrease significantly through the fourth quarter. And so we're working on getting the budget timing to match a little bit of what our expected actual timing is going to be, so that I don't have to sit here and explain why we're way over budget in March and we're on or not nearly as over budget at June. And that's a phenomenon that happens every year, and we need to try to smooth that out. The line above that, line F, loan servicing. When COVID hit last year, we weren't sure what the impact on the servicing portfolio was going to be. And we have found out that it has not been favorable, but it also hasn't been as bad as maybe we discounted the servicing budget for service fee incomes last year at budget time. And so we have enjoyed a good, steady servicing fee for the year. We're favorable to budget, and I would expect that favorable to budget would either at least be that much for the full fiscal year, or possibly even a little bit more favorable than that. Line G, way under budget and unfavorable to budget on the revenue line for the hardest hit funds. That was a program that we resurrected thinking that COVID would take a big piece of that, and the program wasn't competitive with the forbearance programs that were out there in the marketplace. And so not only are we not getting the fee income that we anticipated getting in the budget, but we'll see on the next schedule, we're also not incurring the expense that we would have incurred had that program resurrected. And so that, again, is consistent with what actually has happened for the year, and it's matched up by decreases or favorable to budget on the expense side. Okay, here's a few of the expenses. Well, it's all the expenses, but we're going to talk about a few of them. You can see that the salaries and employee benefits is favorable to budget. That's a timing issue as well. And between that and the rental production line on the income side are things that we're going to be working on to try to get a little bit smoothing to get the right expenses in the right quarter. And what has happened here is that we've incurred more expenses. Our employees have worked, and let's call it the last 8 business days of March, that didn't get paid out until April. And so the expense for those 8 days are not in the financial statements. And the magic of accruals and prepaids can smooth that stuff out so that, again, I'm not having to sit here and explain why we're over budget in one quarter and under budget the next, what have you. But the payroll number for the year will be slightly unfavorable, I believe, to finish the year out. It'll be on budget for what we knew about when we budgeted it. And then we have had some hires and some pay increases that were not in the budget. And a lot of that is attributable to the staffing up of employees on payroll to administer some of the COVID initiatives that we're experiencing, that we're servicing. And that is really mostly shows up on line B. And that's where all the temporary employees that we've hired to administer primarily the eviction relief fund, that's where the cost of those employees shows up in the financial statements. And you can see that we've spent $800,000 more than we had budgeted on this, primarily these temporaries. Now, remember on the schedule before, we showed a significant increase in income on one of those lines. So that increase in income or favorable to variance is exactly, or not exactly offset, but largely offset by the unfavorable variance we're seeing on business services. And so again, the financials in respect of that do make a lot of sense. That number is actually much worse than the $800,000 unfavorable, because part of the hardest hit funds, a positive variance is also netting through there. And so we've probably spent $1 million on extra on temporaries and $200,000 less on counseling services, because we did not get the usage out of the hardest hit funds that we had put into the budget. Similarly, on line C, the other biggest expense on hardest hit is legal fees. And you can see that we're very favorable on legal fees because, again, we did not have to hire or use the legal side of accomplishing the hardest hit. And so even though we're under budget on income on the front side, on the previous statement, we're also under budget on the expense side. Again, it does make sense, and the statements are consistent. Line D, liquidation shortfall, that is way unfavorable to budget. That's a function of 2 different things. $380,000 of that 444 is a timing difference that will reverse in the next couple of years. And it shows up this year because this is the year we actually paid it. And then the balance of that is due to the very, very high prepayments that we've experienced in the servicing portfolio. Liquidation shortfall is an expense associated with mortgage-backed security servicing. And since most of our servicing is mortgage-backed securities and our payoffs are up, it arises when loans pay off. It's an expected expense of servicing under MBSs. It's part of the calculation that goes into the efficacy of deciding whether to go to the secondary market or issue revenue bonds. And so it's a known expense that is going to have to be incurred. We just didn't anticipate that many payoffs this year, so it's impacting the budget versus actual unfavorably on this statement this year, or this quarter, excuse me. Here's a graphical illustration of what the loan forbearance programs are costing us, if you will. The red line is our actual delinquency ratio, total delinquent loans divided by total loans being serviced. And you can see there's been a small uptick in that as anticipated, as folks have suffered negative COVID impact on losing their jobs or being temporarily furloughed. The blue line represents the total number of payments we have not received. And so if a loan is 90 days delinquent, it counts as 1 against the red line. It counts as 3 payments against the blue line. If a loan is 12 months behind, the blue line reflects 12 missing payments for each loan that only counts as 1 on the red line. And so you can see the tremendous amount of payments that we are not receiving, okay? And those of you who were on the board back in March of last year may remember that we increased our lines of credit because all the payments we have to advance to the Jennie Mae security holders, we also have to advance missing tax and insurance payments to taxing authorities for property taxes and insurance companies for hazard insurance on all of our borrowers. And so you can see that all those payments is causing a drain on our liquidity. We have we secured extra lines of credit to accommodate that. These missing payments are, again, temporary. We will recover the lion's share of this from HUD as the forbearance endgame gets played out over the next 4 to 5 months, and claims are filed, and we get reimbursed all those funds that we've advanced. And so we expect clearly, number one, that when COVID does eventually wear out and disappear, that the red line will go back to its historical lows of years past that you can see, and that the blue line will also revert back to less than the 20%. But right now, 52%, we are missing. We have approximately 30,000 loans, and we are missing 52% of that 30,000 or 16,000 payments, and that's payments that we wish we had because we were having to advance those to its security holders and tax and insurance funds. So it is a drain on liquidity. We anticipate the total amount that we will have advanced by June 30th to be about $10 million, and that line is getting worse dollar-wise by about $700,000 or $800,000 a month. Again, it's temporary, but it is pretty ugly on this chart. So I thought it's a kind of a graphic representation of the impact of the forbearance programs on our portfolio. Here's a numerical representation of the forbearance, just to put some things in perspective. The highlighted item down at the bottom, we have close to $112 to $115 million of loans that are 90 days delinquent, that have all sought protection under the COVID forbearance rules, and it's a little over 1,000 loans that are 90 days delinquent. Again, that's 1,000 loans out of 30,000. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's about 3.5%, close to 4%. We had, when we looked at the impact of what COVID may have on our portfolio and causing us to look for increases in our line of credits, we were looking at the 15 to 20% possible impact. So it is an impact. It's 1,200 loans down at the bottom, $137,500,000 in principal balance that we're not getting any payments on. But again, the resolution of that is largely claims with HUD and resumption of the monthly payment on those loans. And so it is a nuisance, no doubt, to keep track of it and to work through the forbearance. Clearly not as big a nuisance for the folks who have been, had their income impaired and on furloughs and unemployment. So we're doing everything we can to keep people in their houses, to work with them through this forbearance period, and then we'll work for them on the resolution of the forbearance as they come out of forbearance over the next 5 or 6 months. This is a recap of the third quarter. No committee action is required, and that concludes my third quarter report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jim. Does anyone have any questions for Jim? That was a lot to absorb. Jeremy, do we need a motion to accept this report?
No, this was information only.
No, sir.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. Is that everything from you, Jim?
No, we got the budget. The
Okay.
the main thing for the budget is the budget. I think it's agenda item 5.
All right, let's go ahead and move into item 5 then.
Right. As usually happens at the May meeting, this is the meeting whereby the operating budget is presented to the Finance Committee a week before the budget is presented to the full board. The action that we are requesting from this committee is approval to make a recommendation at the board meeting. And what happens there, Mr. Brunson, you're familiar with that the budget will be reviewed at the board meeting, at which time you, on behalf of the committee, make a motion to accept, we hope, the budget, and then call for a second at the main board meeting. The action coming out of this meeting, the Finance Committee meeting, is to authorize, if you will, Mr. Brunson to make that recommendation at the board meeting next week. There are 2 resolutions that are made in connection with the budget. One is the adoption of the annual budget, and then The second is the approval of the operating expenses for the year. And so there will be two recommendations coming out of this, and I'll walk you through those as we cover them. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the narrative associated with the budget that was in your packet. I'm going to hit a couple of highlights. I'm not going to bore you with reading the whole thing. But the budget this year was difficult to put together. And let me preface my comments. Sitting in on this meeting are two members of the budget committee that have been unbelievably instrumental in putting this document together. John Davidson and Christina Keys. Christina is our corporate controller, and John is our director of planning and accountability, and oversees the actual budget makers. And the budget makers, I think they're listening in on the YouTube, are Rebecca Schob and Kendrick Vonderschmidt. And both of those folks also have been extremely instrumental in putting this together. Exhibited great patience with the chief financial officer, whoever that clown is, in making changes and tweaking and prettying things up just a little bit. And this would not have happened without the direct involvement of those four individuals. So this is just an acknowledgement and a thank you to those folks for all the efforts that they put into making this budget happen. The pandemic has messed everything up. We didn't know everything that was going to happen last year and its impact on fiscal 21. And we likewise don't know everything that's going to happen because of the pandemic this year and the impact on fiscal 22. We know some of it, but we know enough of some of it to include it in the budget, and we know too little of some of it to include it in the budget. And so in the budget this year is HHERF, and that's the Healthy at Home Eviction Relief Fund program that was passed by Congress right there at the end of calendar 20, and we're in full bore. We saw a little bit of the impact of that, the extra $1 million of income on homeless, which is where the admin fees are coming in, and the increase in the expenses in the budget versus actual what I just went over on the costs that we're incurring in administering that program. We know that that program is going to cost us a lot more in fiscal 22. Part of the budget analysis work that we do, we are not a zero-based budgeting enterprise. So we use the prior year budget, we use the prior year actuals to help us determine the reasonableness of the current year budget. Well, this HHERF mess, if you will, makes the numbers of this year's budget non-comparable to last year. And so you saw, and there's a small discussion in the narrative, that we have carved out of the actual 22 budget. Just follow with me here. We've carved out of the actual fiscal 22 budget, which is going to be approved, the bulk of the impact on the 22 budget coming from HHERF. And by doing that, we've essentially created a pro forma 22 budget that we then are able to compare to 21 budget and 21 actual to make sure that everything is reasonable. And so it's a lot of conversation, a lot of numbers shifting around, but it does help us, and it helped us prepare the budget. It helped us determine that one of the lines wasn't really thrown out of whack, and if it was, then it was attributable to the HHERF. And so as you go through the budget documents in detail, you'll see why the impact of the pro forma was so important. That said, excluded from the budget and excluded from all the pro forma-ing is anything that is attributable to ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed at the end of March. We know so little about the financial impact of that particular initiative that we have excluded it from the budget. Now, how can we do that if we know we're going to incur all those expenses? Well, the way a lot of these programs work, and ARPA is no different, is we are reimbursed for extra expenses that we incur. And so the net impact on the actual bottom line theoretically is zero, because we incur $1 million, we get reimbursed $1 million. And so the gross or the individual line items, when we get to the actuals in fiscal 22 in the quarterly financial statements, may be may show great variances from budget, but the bottom line of the budget should not show any great variances because the net of those should all be very close to zero. It's complicated. I apologize. I'm trying to explain it as best I can, but we think, myself, my fellow deputies, E.D. Miller and the budget crew think that the budget is a sound accumulation of what's going to happen and what we know about is going to happen in fiscal 22 and is the basis for running the company next year. If you look at the paragraph that's highlighted by the Y, we'll get into some of the details. For the newbies on the committee, every year the HRB, the Housing Bond Resolution, contributes an amount from the trust over to the operating budget to help support the staff time and expenses that the operating budget is incurring in support of the HRB. And last year that amount was $3.6 million. This year it's going to be $10 million. And you can ask why an increase of 6.4 million? Well, we're paying the pension off. And part of the pension liability is attributable to activities and actions that have taken place in the HRB over the years in which the pension liability has accumulated. And so we are budgeting to take $6.4 million out of the HRB and use that toward the amount that we're going to have to pay to cease participation in KERS. And so the transfer from the HRB will be basically two components: a repeat of the 3.6 that happened in fiscal 21 and an additional 6.4 that happened in 22. Now, it's the full 10 stays in the revenue budget that we are asking to be approved today, and creates a very large surplus, an uncharacteristically large surplus of 10.7 in the 22 budget. That surplus then is used off budget to pay for the pension plan, to pay for the pension cessation. And so when, as we work through a couple of the detail schedules, you'll see that it comes down, the surplus falls all the way to the bottom line, and then it will be used to pay over to the pay off the pension cessation bill. In addition, and as has been the case in the past several years, $1 million of the surplus will also be paid over to the Housing Assistance Fund. And so the surplus accumulates in the operating account, it accumulates in the operating budget, which is what which we're tasked with approving today. And then once that budget is realized, then the $1 million is transferred over to the HAF. And so so the numbers look a little apples and oranges, but that's why on the revenue side, or the net bottom line in the budget, it's so much higher. Going to then a couple of the more detailed items, if we can go down to, hang on. Okay, just leave it right there for now, Jeremy. The normal activities of the corporation, the normal loan servicing, the normal rental production, the normal programs that we administer for HUD and Treasury and the like, the admin fee recoveries on that and the expenses incurred in running those normal operations essentially have not changed budget this year versus budget last year. The overall level of activity in the normal initiatives is not significantly different. We anticipate a servicing portfolio of about what we had last year. We're budgeting a loan production consistent with what the production numbers were for last year. The homeless, the Section 8, all of the administration of those federal programs, they're at a volume and an activity level very similar to last year. And so the budget for those purposes does not show dramatic increases or decreases. And so that part of the budget was comparatively easy. If you will go, Jeremy, to page 8, please. There we go. And again, I've got some navigation aids on that. They are actually described in the narrative a little bit, but it's a little bit more visual there, and I'll talk over the numbers that you're seeing on the chart. You'll notice that this is comparing pro forma 22 with budget 21, and the normal comparative that we run in the narrative is current year budget versus next year's budget. And again, as I explained, we're using the pro forma. So we've carved out of this analysis changes attributable to HHERF2 primarily. It's $8 million of revenue that is not included in the pro forma budget, and $8 million of expenses that's not included in the pro forma budget. But it does make it a little bit more apples to apples. So if you look at line A, you'll see that there's a tremendous decrease in the overall salaries and budget and benefits line for fiscal 22 versus fiscal 21. This is nothing more than the dramatic decrease in the cost of the pension plan. We have dropped the 21 budget had a 50 cent per dollar of comp pension expense, and the 22 budget has a 4 cent cost per dollar of compensation. And so this in future years, including fiscal 22, will create surpluses in the operating fund that for fiscal 22, that surplus is going to be used to help defease the bill that's going to come for getting out of the pension plan. But in years beyond that, the plan is that those funds will be available for mission and transfers to the Housing Assistance Fund, which is where several surpluses historically have gone, and we will see the benefits of not having that 50 to 60 to 70 cent pension thing around our neck for the next 20 years, and we'll be sitting at 4%. And so this is a visual of the benefit of getting out of the pension plan. Now, the full amount of the pension shortage or savings is a little over $5 million, and that's offset, as is explained in the narrative. There is a small increase in staffing levels to accommodate some activity changes, as well as infrastructural type hires to administer some of the COVID-related programs, and some pay increases, obviously, to existing staff. And so, again, a very positive impact on the budget. And that positive impact falls through right to the surplus of the operating fund that we're analyzing today. Line B, business services. Jeremy, if you would, there's a $475,000 increase in that. If you would switch to forward or to page 13 or wait, 11 maybe. Keep going. Here we go. This is a little bit of detail on that line. Why do we have detail on this line? Well, it's a pretty big line. This number is going to be close to, in the full budget, it's going to be close to $7.5 or $8 million, if even possibly more, which is why we carved it out, because we want some comparability in this year versus last year. But this is where that $2.5 million is being spent in the fiscal 22 pro forma budget. And you'll see that on the first three are big numbers associated with our IT and computer data processing operations. We contract a lot of our network support and a lot of our application development, website design, and cybersecurity to companies, IT companies that specialize in those particular services. The theory being that it's a highly competitive market to get people to actually sign on as employees. And you're getting state of the art, because these companies that they actually work for, that we contract with, keep everybody current. And so this is part of maintaining our systems, keeping them safe, using the latest technology. A lot of network support. We have 80 temps that we've hired to support the HHERF initiative. That's 80 remote devices that network support has to keep up and running so that we can do that. That's 80 more people than we had at this time last year. Cybersecurity, I would hate to be Colonial Pipeline. And so having firewalls and state-of-the-art access to our systems, it costs money. And I was talking to Winston yesterday, and I've been in business for 40 years, mostly in the private sector, but I've come up with the tremendous advances in technology from manual spreadsheets and Greenbar and all the other rot back in the late 70s to what we have today. And there are days when I look at the expense of data processing and say, it would just be cheaper to have 100 people with pencil and paper to do all this stuff. And the first year of that's probably true. But once it's automated, you don't need those 100 people because it's all automated and those calculations are done. So you have to design the systems, make the systems work, and then you get tremendous economies of scale. And when you're looking at servicing 30,000 loans, when you're looking at helping thousands of people in Section 8 and thousands of people on HHERF and eviction relief, and thousands of people who are homeless, you can appreciate the fact that as automated as you can possibly make it is where we want to be. And so this is where the cost of that efficiency shows up. And so we compare this to last year. It's higher than last year. We're supporting a hell of a lot more devices, and cybersecurity is becoming more and more critical that it's there, and putting it there costs more money. And so we're okay with this, and we have the resources to be able to afford to pay it. The other items on the top, which is contractor and temps, are they're significant but not significant, and don't need to be talked out in any great detail. If you look below, these are other services that end up classified as business services on the one line of the budget. And homeowner counseling fees, $225,000. We employ counseling agencies for borrowers pre-borrowing and post-borrowing if they get into into difficulty, on assisting them balance their budgets and reorganize their finances so that they can stay in their homes. And we do that. Much of that $225,000 is reimbursed by HUD using grant funds, and then the HAF, the Housing Assistance Fund on our books, also kicks in $100,000 or $75,000 or $100,000 toward that. So the revenue is there to pay for that. This is where the expense of actually delivering what the revenue is paying for shows up. The third line under this, consultant for rapid rebid of the project-based rental assistance. I've worked here for 9.5 years. For 9.5 years, HUD has project-based rental contract would be rebid and relet and all that other, and it still hasn't been done. But the current wisdom on that contract is if it is put out for bid, that it will be structured in such a way that internally we won't be able to construct a proper bid, if you will, that will be robust enough to win the contract back. And so we realize that it will take some consulting help, and we've got a placeholder in there for the $150,000. The $130,000 QC Pro services, that is in lieu of having 2 or 3 internal audit staff or QC staff on the books. Again, it's cheaper to contract that out to people who are particularly expert in those services, and those are charged to the internal audit budget, which is then allocated to whomever they're performing quality control services on, mostly single-family home ownership originations and single-family loan servicing. The purchase of Jennie Mae Authority, that's the cost. That's a check we write to HUD to buy capacity to issue Jennie Mae securities. Everybody that issues Jennies has to do that. It's a fairly nominal cost relative to the huge profits and benefits of servicing Jennie Mae's. And it's a cost of doing it. It's in the numbers. It's in the analyses. And excuse me, this is where the expense shows up. The next line is network security assessments. That's the spooks that are out there that are trying to penetrate that we hire to try to penetrate our systems. And they work for IT. They constantly are trying to penetrate our systems and get in, and then they issue reports. And this is where the expense of having that work being done is expensed. And so you can see that it's the $2.5 million is made up of myriad items, but it's big enough that going to this level of detail is appropriate in a budget conversation. Okay, we can go back to page 8 then, Jeremy. There we go. Line C, computer operations. That is again consistent with the overall increase in the level of IT services. Again, supporting 80 temps. The cost of the equipment is in this line. The cost of the networking is in this line. And so this is just a reality check that providing the HHERF initiatives is going to cost some money. A lot of this money has been carved out when going from the actual 22 budget to the pro forma budget, but some of it has already been incurred, and it's reflected in some of the 22 pro forma numbers as well. Line D, foreclosures. oh, we're budgeting less foreclosure loss than this year than we budgeted last year. But because of COVID and the moratorium on foreclosures, our losses in fiscal 21 actual are significantly less than the budget. We incurred costs associated with loans that are pending foreclosure and have been expensed in this line. But in addition to others that we have not expensed on, we have recovered practically no claims income from HUD. And so that whole level of activity on an actual basis in 21 was significantly reduced. We've analyzed the COVID loans. We've analyzed the rest of our portfolio. There's a lot of pent-up foreclosures that we hopefully will mitigate with any number of different actions that we can take. And we believe that we'll incur no more than just a little bit over $1 million net associated with foreclosures. Just an item of note, when we service FHA loans, we know that there's going to be a loss component involved in that. And some of it is an interest loss. HUD does not reimburse the total amount of delinquent interest on the loan and so that's a loss. And they only reimburse 75% of the attorney's fees involved in prosecuting the foreclosures. And so the other 25% is borne by us. That's a known, those are known cost elements. They're in the analysis of whether we want to be in the single family origination and servicing business or not. They're acceptable costs vis-a-vis the amount of money that we're getting to do that, to service those loans. And so it's just part of the cost. This is where it shows up in our budget. Skipping down to line E, legal fees. Again, we are not going to be running the hardest hit fund, unemployment bridge program in fiscal 22. It was budgeted in fiscal 21, not used, which is why the budget versus actual in the previous presentation was so favorable. And so we simply are not budgeting it at all this year. And that accounts for the significant drop in budgeted legal fees. Equipment and software. That is the result of a major piece of software that was in the fiscal 21 budget. That software is now done. It was finished under budget, and it's not in the budget for fiscal 22. So that's a nice little decrease there. And then skipping up to G, liquidation shortfall. We talked about that in the budget versus actual in the third quarter. We do not see a significant reduction in payoffs for fiscal 22 vis-a-vis fiscal 21. We were significantly under budgeted at the 228 last year with the higher than budget actuals that we talked about in the third quarter, and realizing that we did bump the liquidation shortfall budget for fiscal 22 up to 385,000 or 157 higher than what was budgeted for last year. So all in all, going down to the bottom line here on the expenses, our overall expenses budgeted are $4.7 million, lower than the budgeted expenses from last year. Again, the lion's share of that coming out of comp and bennies, and the lion's share of that being the reduction in the pension expense. So if we go back to page 6A, Jeremy, please. Here's what we just looked at was the rightmost column of this, the $25.8 million that's in the pro forma budget. And the middle column is the budgetary analysis or numbers associated with the HHERF program 2 and ESG CV voucher. That's the voucher, extra vouchers in homelessness. And the $8.1 million of expenses associated with those two programs are in the actual 22 budget. They were just carved out so we could compare 22 to 21. And so you can see in the leftmost column of this schedule what the actual budget for 2022 is. And we're budgeting expenses of just short of $34 million, which is a significant increase over last year, but this schedule accounts for how we get from last year to this year. And so this is what we will be presenting on budget versus actual in the comparison of actuals for fiscal 22. This is the budget that the board, that this committee is being asked to recommend to the board, and which we hope the board will pass, a $34 million expense budget for fiscal 22. And you can see where the numbers are in the middle column there. $5.5 million in business services, and the $1,096,000 is costs from the operating budget that are being allocated over to this budget, costs that were not recoverable in the operating budget. And so the lion's share of this is temps and the cost of housing those temps. And it's a tremendous, we are thrilled to be able to administer this program for the Commonwealth and for the federal government. We're not going to make a cent doing it, but we're going to get props and credit. And when we do it right, we're going to be making a lot of people's lives a lot easier for having gone through this exercise and taking on this particular project, as well as the ARPA that's not in the budget. But it's just a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous benefit, like I said, to the folks who are suffering here in the Commonwealth. Jeremy, if you'd back up 2 more pages, please, then to page 5. Okay, so this is the other schedule this is the main budget schedule that's going to be approved. And you can see that the 2022 budget total fees and expenses is the $33,951,000, which is what we just looked at on the page 6A, is the total expenses that we'll be incurring this year. And we have revenue. I'm down at the bottom of this. I'm sorry to be bouncing around this. The next to last number, the 33,951, is the actual expenses that are detailed on page 5 or 6, excuse me, and the $46 million just above that are the revenues that are budgeted and in the columns in the detail just above. And so we have a budget with generating a $12.7 million surplus, totally explainable, and we've got a use for almost all of it. The lion's share of it's going to be used to help defease the bill that we have to put to get through the pension withdrawal. And so, a lot of numbers bouncing around. Just a short conversation to get it discussed. I want to read a couple of sentences from the conclusion part of the narrative. As the corporation moves into fiscal 22 and looks ahead to 23 and beyond, it is clear that trying to predict what the world will be like is potentially an exercise in futility. And this is our attempt to at least look 12 months out into a very uncertain world. And
Jim, can I interrupt you 1 second?
Absolutely.
Secretary Johnson needs to leave the meeting, and she's been attempting to communicate with us, and we've not heard her communications. Do we have a quorum, Jeremy, if Secretary Johnson leaves the meeting at this point?
Yes, we would have a quorum.
Okay. Secretary Johnson, if you can hear me, and I'll try to respond to you by text, please proceed to your other meeting, and thanks for inquiring about the need for a quorum. And thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, as well. Am I back on, Mr. Chairman? I think so.
Yes, please proceed. I'm sorry.
And we did our best to try to keep this to an hour, and I think we're going to run maybe 5 or 6 over. What the budget does include is an acknowledgement that succession planning is a must. It's imperative that as people who have a lot of institutional knowledge and are able to leave that knowledge behind, and we are able to groom folks so that if those folks, God forbid, get run over by a bus or do retire, that we don't have significant knowledge gaps. And so this budget does include some provisions for succession planning, which I think is a necessary deal for our budget purposes, because we're so small. Corporations that have 12,000 people have a bullpen of people chomping at the bit to get a starting position. We don't have that luxury of having that kind of redundancy of capability or knowledge, and so we have to groom it specifically. And this budget has provisions in it to do that particular grooming. The other thing that's in this budget, and something that we need to constantly be on track of, is business continuity planning. What happens if? And so we do devote time to backup of systems What happens if nobody can come into the office? Well, we found out what happens if nobody comes into the office. COVID forced us all home. And yeah, we skipped a beat there for maybe 30 days, but we're getting the job done remotely. And so constantly being on guard for that it costs money on an ongoing basis, but it does set us in a position to not miss a beat. What we do is too important to the citizens of the Commonwealth to allow some issue or event to prevent us from being able to do that. And so the budget does have some provisions in that so that we're able to at least handle those eventualities that we may not anticipate discreetly. And so I think it's a good budget. I recommend that this committee vote to recommend it to the full board next week. I'm happy to answer any questions now, tomorrow, by phone, whatever. But that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just add before there's any further questions or a motion or a vote. I wholeheartedly endorse the budget that Jim has presented. He and his team, consisting of an enormous amount of people here at Kentucky Housing, have labored long and hard hours over accumulating this and weeding through it and presenting it. And I think they've done a superior job. So I hope we'll have your support on it, but we stand ready to answer any questions and try to also explain anything that may be confusing. There's a lot of information here, and there's a lot of moving parts. And so we certainly understand if you have questions, don't be bashful, don't be hesitant, don't be reluctant to ask them. We're here to try to answer them, and I think we can. So the floor is back to you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse my interruption.
Thank you, Winston. Appreciate that. And Jim, thank you again for your extensive description of the budget and the related financial material. Does anyone have any questions for Jim? Okay, hearing none, we'll need a motion to accept Jim's report and authorize myself, the chairman, to take the information forward to the board's meeting next week. Do I have a motion?
So moved by Katie.
Katie, second?
Second, Gail.
Thank you, Gail. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay, hearing none, the motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, will that be a motion to recommend both resolution number 27 and 28 to the board?
That was my intention, yes.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
I do not have any additional items. Does anyone have anything else I'd like to bring to the board or to the committee's attention?
On behalf of the staff of Kentucky Housing, I'll say that we do not have any additional items to bring before this committee at this time. I'm sure that we will have a few additional items next week with the full board meeting that we'll be bringing forward for your all's discussion. But again, I want to thank Jim and all the people here for the job, and I want to thank you all as members of the Finance Committee for laboring through this and being responsive to it. Thank you.
Thank you again, Winston. Okay, hearing nothing, I will accept the motion to adjourn.
This is George. I'll move we adjourn.
Thank you, George. And a second?
Second by Katie Smith.
Thank you, Katie. All agrees to vote aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? I doubt. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their Thursday, and thank you for your patience over this last hour.
All right.
I echo that. Thank you very much.